All right, so 2.1 is over conditional statements. You've actually heard them all of your life. Most of the time you hear them in like a negative context, but they're not always negative. So meaning, let's look. How many of you ever heard your parents say, if you don't clean your room, then you can't go to the mall, or I'll take your phone, or something like that? That is a conditional statement because it has the words if and then. Also look at our picture. What two words are the largest? If and then. So that's like the foundation of conditional sentences. They will always have those. If you speed, then you will get a ticket, most likely. So conditional statements also have true and false properties to them. I'm showing you this because I want you to just appreciate that you take geometry in my class. So on page, what is this? Is this 2.1? On page 70 in your textbook, these are called truth tables. I had to memorize these when I was your age. I hated geometry because of these truth tables. You had to literally memorize when it was like if the hypothesis was true and the conclusion was true, then it just was super frustrating. Did not appreciate it, but you're not going to have to do that. If you do well with common sense, then you will do just fine. Okay. If you don't, you might have to study a little bit more. But we're going to talk about this. Conditional statements is a logical statement. Okay, logical statement. So that's the first blank. So a conditional statement is a logical statement, and then I want you to write, it's made up of two parts, a hypothesis and a conclusion. A hypothesis and a conclusion. So if you start a food fight, then you'll probably, I don't know, get expelled. I don't know what happens. But which part of that would be the hypothesis? If I said, if you start a food fight, then you would, let's say, get expelled. Yeah, you starting a food fight, that's the hypothesis. The conclusion would be you would get expelled. You probably wouldn't, but you get it. So when you see at the top of your page, if and then, if contains the hypothesis and then contains the conclusion. So if you look, P is the hypothesis. Is the word if that I'm pointing at, is that in red? Is this if in red? No. It is just more like a flasher. Like here is the hypothesis. It is not a part of the hypothesis. Okay? Then informs you that I'm starting the conclusion. Okay? So if and then will never move. They're written in black because no matter what kind of statement you use, we're going to learn 3 different types. If and then will always be there. Okay? So, let's do this. If you are in this class, then you are taking geometry. Again, what's the hypothesis? You are in this class, not the word if. Then the conclusion is you are taking geometry. So what you're going to learn in this section is sometimes when you switch them around, they're not always true. This is true if you are currently in this class, you are taking geometry, yes? But if I switched it and said, if you are taking geometry, then you are in this class, would that be true? No, because not every geometry student is in this class, or I would have 8 geometry students, okay? So you're going to learn about switching them, about writing the negatives of them, and things like that. All right, so here we go. This is about halfway through the notes. It's on the nope. It's on where the middle hole punches. Sorry, I was trying to find it. Use H. Mine says use H to identify the hypothesis and C to identify the conclusion. Then write each conditional in the if and then form. All members of the soccer team have practiced today. So here's what I know I will write. I'm going to write them in black so we know that they don't change. If, and all the way over here we're going to do then. I'll move it. So this actually is hard for some people because you need to identify what could be the hypothesis and what could be the conclusion. What I think is actually easier in this problem is to first identify the conclusion. So what do you think the conclusion of the sentence is? They have practice today. Okay, so what you would want to do is you want to make it somewhat of a sentence. So what would be a good subject of this sentence if they have practice today? I just said it. Yeah, well, not yet. They have practice today. I never write small enough for this. They have practice today. So we're getting there. The second half of the sentence, you would have already identified what the full subject is, what we're all talking about. If they have practice today is the second part. Then they have practice today. What do you think the if would be? If you're on the soccer team. If you're on the soccer team. So if you say if you are, then that means then you have. I'm just fixing the sentence. So if you're on the soccer team, then you have practice today. You could have said if they are on the soccer team, then they have practice today. So under the red, that's my hypothesis, and then the blue is my conclusion. Okay, so sometimes you can work backwards to figure it out. This one's a hard one for students, but that's why I do it with you, so you can see a hard one. So here's this. Okay, the next portion, this is most students' favorite part. A statement can all be altered by negation. Negation of a sentence is the opposite of the original statement, the very opposite. So to negate a statement, it's the very opposite of the original statement. All right, so if the measure of angle A equals 30 degrees in our original statement, the opposite would be that the measure of angle A is not 30 degrees. All right, if I said angle A is not acute, what do you think the negation of that is? Angle A is acute. So in the first, the measure of angle A is 30 degrees. The measure of angle A is not 30 degrees. So what was the only difference in what I said? Not. In the second, angle A is not acute. The negation is angle A is acute. So what did I take away? The word not. Guess what? That's all you do. You're going to either add the word not or take away the word not. So you don't change the sentence other than adding that word. Okay? So if I said the sky is blue, to negate it, you would not say, well, actually the sky is red. Okay, that's not how you negate. You would say, the sky is blue, the sky is not blue. That is not my mom, that is my mom. Does that make sense? So, this is the symbol for negation. It is a squiggle. You write it right under the negation. All right, so to write the negation of statement P, you would write the symbol negation before the letter. So instead of saying not P in words, the symbols would look like squiggle. Oops, sorry. This symbol will look like squiggle P. You don't have to write that down at the minute. We're going to learn the 3 types of sentences, and it'll make more sense. Okay? So, write the negation of each statement. The car is white. What do we think the negation is? The car is not white. And then it is not snowing. It is snowing. So we added not, took away not. If you see a ton of these on your test, you won't see a ton. But if you see more than one, that's like me lobbing up a ball so you can home run. Okay? Meaning I'm just giving you something. It's okay. So these were if P then Q, and the symbol is P arrow Q. What did these represent? Hypothesis and conclusion of what kind of a sentence? Or what kind of a statement? Conditional. So there are 3 other types. The first one is a converse. You can write exchange, or you could say switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. I did that with the geometry sentence. Okay, this is where you switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. I'm going to tell you a story that may or may not help you remember. It helps me remember this a lot. So, what are the shoes that are popular now? Okay, Vans. What else? What do you have? I've never seen those. Nike. It's not a quiz. Like, what's popular now? The John Rogers. Okay. Well, those are the popular shoes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. These little girls like to wear the. You know what I mean, like the The sandals. I'm sorry, I'm not a shoe person. When I was your age or even younger, it was literally Converse. Okay, so think of this word Converse. I'm not even done yet. So when I conformed, I mean, I decided to go with the flow. I wanted to still be like my own person. Okay, so what I did, my middle school self, is I went out and I bought all these different types of laces. I'm talking like funky designs, like your lanyard there. Or I bought like brightly colored ones. I brought white ones. I had the smiley face one. I just did all these things, right? So then I would every day, no joke, every day I would switch my shoelaces. Yeah, I would either do like every other, or I would do one here, one here. I mean, it was dedication. I was very good at it towards the end of the year. I mean, obviously you forget a couple days here and there, but I was a dedicated individual. So when I think of this, I think of me switching my laces. Okay, so when you think of Converse, think of the shoes, think of me switching my laces. Okay, that is the best way. If you find another way, that's cool, you do you. But this is mine. The second kind is called the inverse. The inverse. Oh, before we do that, sorry. Getting ahead of myself. So when we do the converse, we're switching the hypothesis and the conclusion. So then it would be if Q, then P. Because what does Q represent? The conclusion. And then P represents hypothesis. Okay, so you switch them. So the symbols, instead of P arrow Q, it will be Q arrow P. Okay, again, if you know what these symbols are, on your test it's going to say, write the converse of it, and it'll have the symbols. So if you remember the symbols, then you barely have to remember that you switch them. Okay? Hypothesis, then conclusion. Now we get to the inverse. To write the inverse of a statement, negate both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So you negate both the hypothesis and the conclusion. How I remember this one, when you say the word inverse, what is the first letter you hear? Well, that's the first letter you see. But do you hear I inverse? You hear the N, inverse. So what I think of is I think of the N, the letter N, for inverse, and then I think of the letter N for negate. Okay? So that's how I remember. Inverse, negate. You don't have to remember it beautifully. I'm sorry if it's not the greatest thing in the world, but that's how I remember. Okay? So what you would say is if not P, then not Q. The hypothesis and the conclusion stay in the same spots as a regular conditional. Hypothesis first, conclusion second. But instead you're going to say not on both of them. So, how do we say not in symbols? What does the symbol look like? The squiggle. So you'll say squiggle P, arrow squiggle Q. Okay, so negate the hypothesis, negate the conclusion. And the last is called contrapositive. It is the longest word. So it is only appropriate that it is the one you do the longest work for. It's not like a lot of work, but I'm just trying to help you remember. Longer word, you do both. You're going to switch and negate. So I would write, you can write the long definition, or you can write switch and negate the hypothesis and the conclusion. Switch and negate the hypothesis and the conclusion. So switch and negate. So longer word, you do, quote unquote, more work. Okay, you don't really, you switch and you write the word not. But that's just how I remember. Longer word, you're going to do two things. Okay, it's also made up of two words, contrapositive. So you do two parts to it. So you're going to switch them, so which would come first, hypothesis or conclusion? Conclusion, and you're going to say not. So if not Q, then not P. If not Q, then not P. And the symbols, what do you think that they would look like?
Squiggle Q.
Yep, squiggle Q, arrow, squiggle P. So the negation of the conclusion, and then the negation of the hypothesis. All right, you ready to do some sentences? We do one. All right, let P, so at the very bottom of your notes, give you a chance to catch up. I'm going to underline them, P and Q, like they were for us before. Let P be, you are in New York City, And let Q be you are in the U.S. Write each statement in words and decide whether it's true or false. No matter what kind of statement it is, what word will always go first? If. Perfect. All right, so in a conditional, the conditional is a very original statement. The hypothesis goes first, and then the conclusion comes second. What is the hypothesis of this sentence? Yep. If you are in, where? New York City, yep. NYC. What word would come next? Then. And then what is our conclusion?
You are in the U.S.
You are in the U.S. And then we have to decide whether or not we think that that is true. So if you're in New York City, are you in the United States?
Yes.
Yes, so that would be true. All right, the converse, what do we end up doing? Switching like my laces. So the conclusion comes first. The hypothesis is second. So my conclusion is, if you're in the U.S., then what happens? Yep, then you're in New York City. All right, so how many of us in this room are in the United States? Every single one of them. Are we in New York City? No, so is this true? It is false. False. All right, we get down to the inverse. Which comes first, hypothesis or conclusion? Hypothesis. And what do we do with these since it's the inverse? We negate. So negate the hypothesis, and then we negate the conclusion. All right, so my hypothesis is you are in New York City. What is the negation of that? You are not in New York City. Then we always write the word then. And then the negation of our conclusion. What is our... You are in the United States, so the negation of that is... You are not in the United States. All right, let's see if this one is true. If you're not in New York City, we're not in New York City, then you're not in the U.S. Is that true? No. It is not, so that's false. All right, we got one more contrapositive. So which comes first, hypothesis or conclusion? Conclusion. And not only the conclusion, but we negate it. So here's what I tell people to do if you want to pause for a second. You can just look at it and read, or you can look at your converse. Your converse is already switched. So what's all that's left to do for the contrapositive? Add the not. Okay, so you could take the contrapositive and write the word not. So where you would start, if you are not in the United States, so if you are not in the United States, then, okay, you, instead of you are in New York City, you are not in New York City. So now we need to decide if we agree. So if you're not in the United States, you are not in New York City. Do we think this is true or false? True. I think it's true as well. There's only one New York City, and it is surely in the United States. All right, so these are the sentences. We're going to flip, and we got one more section. You learn a geometry word, and then I'll show you. So the reason that you learn conditional statements is because you can use a definition and rewrite it in a conditional statement, that will happen for the rest of geometry. For all of the properties we learn, they'll be written as a conditional. Like this one, if two lines intersect to form a right angle, then they are perpendicular lines. That is a definition on your page, or term. Two lines that intersect to form a right angle, they are perpendicular. So when a perfectly vertical and perfectly horizontal line cross, that is a right angle, which makes them perpendicular. Can anybody think of anything in this room that's perpendicular? There's about 1 billion things that are. The walls, yes. The walls with each other. The walls with the ceiling. What else? They have more of like a rounded edge. If they were more solid.
The podium?
Yeah, the podium. All of the corners of the podium, I agree. You're saying these? I hope they are. I tried. They might not. The board over here, this line coming down, this line coming across, every single intersection of this wall is perpendicular. Because those lines, all these center blocks are perfectly lined up and vertical and horizontal, those make them also perpendicular. We got my board over here, my desk, so many things. My filing cabinets, all the corners, all perpendicular. Okay? So the notation you'll see for the symbol, this is the symbol of perpendicular. It is literally an upside down T. And if you don't agree, I have it right here. When you flip it upside down, it is a capital T. All right? T for Tito. Just kidding. Didn't even catch it. It's cool. So your book says, like N stands for line N. I still prefer if you write line. Anyways, so this is saying line N is perpendicular to line M. So that's the kind of notation that you'll see. All right? And we just said this, and we said that. All right, this is the last section. Decide whether each statement about the diagram is true. Explain your answer using the definitions you have learned. Here's not a good reason, because it looks like it. No. You have to explain why, explain the definition, or whatever. So let's look at the first. The measure of angle AEB is 90 degrees. Do we agree? Yes. Why do we agree? Okay, but that box is not called a box, remember. It's the right angle what? Symbol, yeah. So this is a long definition, but true because of the right angle symbol. We call them a box because we like to dumb things down, which is not bad. But the technical definition would be because of the right angle symbol. The second, AC and D, letter B. AC and D are collinear. Do we agree? No. I don't agree. What does collinear mean? They're on the same line. Which is not on the same line? D. So I would say false because D does not lie on the same line. The last, we have AC, which is going this direction, and CA, which is going this direction, are opposite rays. Do we agree? Does anybody else agree?
Wait, no.
Tito doesn't agree. I don't agree. Why aren't they opposite rays?
Because they're going in the same direction.
They don't have the same endpoint, yeah. So they have different endpoints. That's the reason. They both definitely go in the opposite directions, but they don't have the same endpoint. So false because they don't have the same endpoint. Make sure you got an order of operations worksheet from yesterday. It looked like this. Did everyone grab one?
No.
Okay.
No.
So it's on the podium. Glad I asked. It's due tomorrow. So if you finish your homework today, then your classwork is your homework. That's not your classwork. That was from yesterday. If you finish it early, then you have no homework. We changed your quiz. We talked about at the beginning of class. Changed it to Thursday because Friday is that half day. Your test is the Wednesday after that. So not this upcoming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after. Okay?